right, welcome everyone. My name is Anna. I'm here today with Nina Berler from Uncommon Apps. She has been a trusted colleague for a few wonderful years, and she has helped a number of my students get to colleges of their choice and really good fits. So we're very happy that you were able to join us today. And we'll be talking to you about what it has been like this year and what seems to be in the cards for the next application cycle. So, Nina, if you want to ease our viewers into the mayhem that has been this year, I just see one headline after another about what a tremendously special this admission cycle has been.
It's
To put it
special. We are
politely.
students, and our students are special. Our parents are special. Yes, and back at you, I keep getting emails and seeing headlines about testing. So who would have known? Maybe you did 4 years ago, but it's outrageous. So again, I just want to also welcome everybody. We plan to speak with you and do Q&A this evening. We anticipate the prepared remarks will probably run 45 minutes to an hour, plus Q&A, and we'll stay on. If we have questions, we'll try to answer as many as we can. So, and if you could just please make sure that you're muted, that would help a lot as well.
Wonderful.
Excellent. So,
a little bit about Nina. Go ahead, please.
Oh, would you like me to? Okay. So Anna and I, yeah, like you said, Anna, we've been together doing these sorts of things for about 8 years now, I think, since back in Hoboken, New Jersey at the Hudson School, when you used to come in and greet our parents. And this is wonderful. So for our audience, Anna and I, we were having lunch earlier this year, and we said, we just can't wait to do this again. And we miss our teaching and teaching live. But in the meantime, we can take advantage of Facebook Live, and we can take advantage of Zoom and meet everybody virtually. And we're so thrilled so many wanted to join us this evening. Just to introduce myself very, very quickly, I'm here in Chatham, New Jersey, near New York City, and I'm looking at my windows and I see sunshine. So the rain has stopped, reminding us that it's spring. Warmth is in the air, flowers are blooming, and decisions are coming. And those are decisions from colleges for our seniors, and also decisions for test takers, which, Anne, aren't they due out in 2 days?
The 22nd, we have been kind of on the edge of our seats.
Unbelievable. We really are. So again, I'm Nina Berler. I know some of you. Anna knows some of you, and we hope to meet all of you again virtually. I switched from developing educational programs for adults and professionals with a Big Four consulting firm early in my career because I wanted to work with teenagers. So who would have known I would have wound up here tonight having developed programs for those teenagers. And through my business, Uncommon Apps, I've been just so thrilled to meet so many incredibly talented students and their parents, not only around New Jersey and New York, but also around the country, private schools, boarding schools, public schools, independent schools, just incredible. And through my years at the Hudson School in Hoboken, I also was able to meet so many students with so many talents, including a lot of international families there. And so hopefully for all of you tonight, the ability, as Anna has also, to look across so many students over the years with different backgrounds has really helped gain a perspective on what goes on in this incredibly dramatic and overhyped and scary business. You can see the credentials there. I just want to mention also, I have such a fondness for working with students and teaching them life skills, particularly communication skills. I love to write about college and education and have developed ed tech products as well, as you'll see in the background. Now for Anna to introduce herself.
Well, I have been in test prep for longer than I am actually willing to admit now. Over 17 years. And I work with students of all ages and all levels. Everything from younger kids who are gearing up for private schools, specialized high schools, college admissions exams, graduate exams. Part of my work has evolved out of necessity, and I've begun to give executive function coaching as well, because it seems everybody needs a little bit of support in getting things done. So I've enjoyed working with students all over the tri-state area, all across the United States and abroad as well. And again, just working with wonderful students of all different levels with different goals, and helping them get where they need to go.
Absolutely. So our presentation this evening, what we hope to be able to share with you from this experience in college counseling and in test prep is understand this wacky year, 2023-24. What are the trends and what are the results? And help you, the audience, and I hope we have some teenagers, some applicants on here, not just parents, but we'll see, become more knowledgeable about what's coming up in this 2024-25 cycle. This is an interesting time, and Anna and I planned this because we knew these decisions were coming in, and we're going through sort of in our businesses, this flip to the next year already, looking at prospective applicants and some underclass people as well through the testing and the college counseling. We want to make sure that you understand in this interesting year for standardized testing about the new digital SAT, which the media loves to write about. Anna's got the experience to really make all that clear for you. Talk about how your students can incorporate standardized testing into their schedules. And we want you to feel confident in what you can control in this college and testing process and what you can't control, because we think that'll help you feel more educated about the process and understand what's ahead of you in a way that isn't fear-based, but is more knowledge-based. Okay, thank you, audience, for the questions. When we sent out the form, the digital form, I got back, and Anna got back, a lot of interesting questions. Some of them are bulleted here in this slide. For example, when do I get started with this process? A few people in the last 2 days wrote, we're new to this, so anything you can do is helpful, treat us like we're beginners, and other people have been through this with other children. Some want to know more about, of course, how do you tell the difference in colleges? How do you find the best fit? Somebody wanted to know about early applications. There's early action, there's early decision. Is there an advantage to applying early? Fortunately, in this one, we're going to talk a few statistics. We actually have some data from this year about early apps. And somebody wanted to know the weight of SAT scores in the admissions process, right? And, we have some history about understanding that, and we know what the admissions people have been saying about that, and we'll share that. How do we filter for schools with relevant programs? That's something we're on year-round, understanding what's going on there in curricular offerings around colleges and universities, and getting that best fit for your student. There's a question about the math section of the digital SAT. Anna, I don't know about your emails, but mine sure had some things about that math section that students took on, what was it, March 9th?
Yep.
And
Lots
finally,
of excited text messages on that day.
I bet you'll have to share them with this audience. What are the expectations for this next admission cycle? We'll do the best we can helping you out. And then there were some other questions. Hopefully we'll get to. We'll spend some time at the end. Some were a little specific and a little niche. For example, related to financial aid. And that's something I didn't mention at the onset, but in my business, I deal with all aspects of the college and college to career business, with the exception of financial aid, but I will throw in some comments about aid and merit aid in this presentation as well.
Wonderful. So, Nina, tell us a little bit about the trends that we're seeing.
Right. You know, Anna, as you well know, what happened in 2020, I remember sitting with you in New York doing a presentation, and it was January 2020, and the rumors were flying. And that year just helped do a somewhat of either a flip in how applicants were looked at and how volumes soared and how testing went online, the whole thing. So prior to 2020, for all of you out there, I'd say as a college counselor, I had a whole lot more confidence about likely outcomes for my students as I worked so closely with them through sometimes a sophomore, junior year, junior into senior year, and into the application cycle. We knew that colleges looked at candidates in what we call a holistic manner, right? Different components of their candidacy. Some were still conducting interviews, even live interviews at that time before 2020. And some of the schools were really getting into video submissions, something that I love to talk to my families about. Students were prepping away, as Anna knows, about their and getting into their test results for the SAT, the PSAT, and the ACT, and talking about super scores. And there were clearly tiers in the colleges. Hey, there always have been. So with elite colleges, which are highly selective, doesn't mean they're better. They're just more selective, right? Their application, their acceptance rates were dropping. And then these very popular public research universities continued to gain popularity. That was prior to 2020. Then after 2020, things flew, trends took off. And you can see some of the bolding on this slide of holistically. Schools used to talk about that they were holistic in admissions, looking at the whole person and their contributions and their family life and their extracurriculars. Well, when tests had to go test optional, when those sites were shut down, schools, colleges, universities had to look at candidates holistically in a whole new way. All of a sudden, the interviews were down, right? Students were uploading more. Colleges were looking more at their senior year, right? So an applicant puts in an app, maybe it's September, October, November. Schools wanted to know about senior year courses. They were changing their supplements over the last couple of years. So after 2020, the SAT and the ACT, students' families were asking us all the time, what happens if we don't submit? Do they really mean test optional when they say they're test optional? And look at the big bolding there. Without the requirement for the test on many, many, many of these colleges, admissions offices, right? The application volumes soared and they reached record highs. And this is across the board, but with highly selective colleges and those popular public universities, they had never foreseen this sort of applicant volume. This slide, there's a picture of, well, good old Tufts in the springtime. Happy spring, everybody. Today's the first full day, and up at Tufts, it looks like they're having some nice blossoms there. But the admissions director at Tufts, who's very sharing with the college counseling community, was saying last year, our applicant pool's 50% larger. It's 75% larger than it was in the past. We're getting so many thousands of extra applications. So it's all contributed to the changes in our pool and its composition, and mentioned virtual programs, virtual outreach, shifting demographics, because that's what's happened. When volumes soar, colleges are able to dip their hands virtually into applications that they never thought they would see prior to 2020. Okay, those public research universities, I bet we have a whole lot of applicants and parents on this call tonight who love schools like Michigan and Wisconsin, and UVA and UNC Chapel Hill. And these are ever so popular. I had a slide there about UVA after the Tufts slide. Sorry, there it is. There's beautiful. There's the rotunda, Jeffersonian. There's a little Jefferson inside if you've never been to UVA. And what I'm trying to do on these slides, by the way, is share comments from the admissions people at these very, very interesting, popular colleges. So our audience gains a sense of awareness about what they look for. So this slide here, UVA has announced all its decisions. We know there's a lot of tension with high school seniors because some of them are still waiting for decisions. March is a very popular month, not just for basketball, it's popular for SATs and college admissions. UVA finished up sending their notifications. Out-of-state students, I assume most people on this call tonight aren't from Virginia. They accepted 13% of the applicant pool from out of state, 25% through their early decision round, and 16% through early action. And what I love about UVA and want to share when our parents are filling out those surveys and sending them to us about how do we know about best fit, how do we learn more about colleges, UVA has a very forward-thinking dean there who loves to share her thoughts, and she says to us, activities don't have to be related to your academic interests. They should just be rewarding and fun, right? Don't be afraid to try something because it doesn't fit into a strategy. So there's UVA admissions. Oh my goodness, it's USC. For those of you who are interested in Southern California and USC, I have a film student there in his freshman year at USC, and he's having a great time. I heard from his dad. USC, like, they've had some issues in admissions, Anna. Like, you talk about why it makes all the headlines, why these schools get in the media so much, right? So USC, for example, it added a new early option last year, an early action program. They never did it. They never believed in it. And they got so swept up in volume that they wound up deferring nearly the entire applicant pool to regular decision. And I had source on the ground there at USC to verify that. So unbelievable. USC says, here's how we look at you, candidates: the rigor of your program, your performance and skill, your writing skills. Love that, right? And test scores you choose to submit, and we consider personal qualities, community involvement, leadership achievements. So USC, we're so glad you like all that stuff. Just please, with the admissions, right? Stop deferring everybody. And next school up, Northeastern. Anna, how many of your applicants apply to Northeastern?
Quite a few.
Oh my goodness, it has never been more popular. Northeastern, the school of going to work, the co-op program, right? With so much expense related to college, parents and students want results. It drove the popularity of Northeastern. Then they got the guy who ran Tulane's marketing over at Northeastern and the pandemic, and it exploded. So here's Northeastern telling parents and students, we have so many application options for you. So they have a program called NUN. I have a citation about NUN here. First semester global experience rooted in Northeastern's core belief. Here's the deal. Northeastern bought out campuses. It has a London campus. It has a California campus. And it has deals with colleges in Europe. What's the deal? They're driving application volume, and they're then telling students, you have to pick which campus you want to start in if we accept you. The good news, Anna, is I've had 4 students get into Northeastern this year, 3 of them in the NUN program, and they love that program.
Yeah, I've had a lot of happy students who started abroad. Imagine, like, first semester and you're somewhere in Italy. It's fantastic.
It's fantastic. Yeah. And colleges, it's a function of their goals and their priorities and their volume. Penn State, for a US example, right? They have too much volume, so they wind up farming out students to the satellite campuses or starting them a month early. And instead of meeting their friends in London as freshmen, they meet their friends in University Park in the summertime. So there you go. Testing. Oh, yes. Testing in 23-24, this cycle we're just finishing up. Thank goodness, right? You had California, always its own animal, test blind by court ruling, which means they don't consider tests in admissions. However, we have all these students from California who are testing, right? Because they want to be going to school outside of California or in private universities in California, not the UC system. MIT and Georgetown, we heard about this, they just couldn't wait to go back to testing. Anna knows this, they're numbers-driven institutions. And they're very, very selective, and they went back to mandatory tests as soon as those sites were available. Also in the South, this is interesting to watch. I mean, I think we have a few Southern people signed up for the session this evening. Florida, Georgia, also Tennessee went back to testing over the past year. And a lot of that, I believe, is driven by they had so much volume. And these popular huge universities like the Georgia Dogs and the Florida Gators, right? They had to have other metrics to be able to sort through these things. Very typical of that type of school. So there you have it, Georgia and Florida. And then there was more. Oh my goodness. Oh, yeah. Speaking of selective schools, trends in college admissions, before we talk about the change in the testing trend, I have here in the middle column, these are rates from early admissions from this cycle. So we don't have the final numbers in yet because they're announcing, the schools on this list are announcing between this week and April 1st. But Duke, 13% in the early round. 6% was their overall rate last year. We expect it to be about that this year from what we hear. USC, we talked about them before, 7% of the early. That's because they deferred so many of them. Emory, BU, BC, you see those 32, 34% acceptance rates for the first round of early decision. They drop a bit for the second round. That's part of when we work with an applicant and we have priorities assigned to their colleges and so on. And then there's Georgetown with its restrictive early action. Again, I know some of you on this call are new to this business and we're throwing around some terms tonight, but it's part of the process. I hope you'll understand it as we go through. Okay. Oh my goodness. To Anna's point, get this headline from the Wall Street Journal, March 12th. The most confusing, chaotic college admissions season in years. Yes, Journal, we certainly know that. And look at the picture from there's good old Brown, right? So at Brown, they always protested. They protested since the 60s. And here, I didn't want to pick something too controversial. It looks like they were doing something about taxes, paying the taxes, because there were some fights there on College Hill about Brown paying its taxes to Providence and so on. But anyway, this season was the most chaotic, and it was chaotic because of inconsistencies in messages from colleges. I just mentioned some of those. In decisions and deadlines, in the financial aid, the new system that took place, FAFSA, right, got so messed up that colleges are now extending their notification there, instead of May 1st being the public date that everybody has to submit their, they get it, offers of admission. They have to tell the college that they're going to accept an offer and decline the others. The date historically is May 1st. All of a sudden it's being pushed, and it's pushed because of the problems in the government, in the tax system. And we have all sorts of messages about testing and about admissions. So of course it's a mess. Here we go to Anna's discipline of testing. You might have heard this. The media loves it. All of a sudden, these highly selective schools going back to testing. So it wasn't just MIT and Georgetown anymore. It was Dartmouth and good old Brown, right? Drink it down, right? All of a sudden, going back to mandatory testing. I picked this quote from Dartmouth. Took that picture there a couple of summers ago. I go there every summer, Anna, to get a milkshake. Dartmouth said, it's totally true, most of our students have something close to straight A's, and that's wonderful, but also in and of itself, not a helpful way of sorting. They mean sorting through applications. Test scores, okay, are also useful, says beautiful Dartmouth. And then there was more. Good old Yale, okay? The Bulldogs at Yale, they made an announcement too. And what's interesting is these things don't seem to be a function of how liberal the institutions are. Like when we think of a school like Yale or a school like Brown and all the freedom that they have, they still went back to standardized tests too. And I really believe they just couldn't handle the volume anymore. But Yale went to what we call a test flexible rather than a test mandatory, meaning SAT, ACT. They're allowing applicants starting with the next cycle to use AP scores or International Baccalaureate IB results if they want to submit those in lieu of the SAT or ACT, right? And Yale tells us in the Yale way, even a score below Yale's median range, thanks Yale, right? They give the committee, meaning the admissions committee, greater confidence that they're likely to achieve academic success in college, right? So there we go. And then came, oh, this is a lovely school for those of you who know Texas, UT Austin, the Longhorns, right? This was the least surprising to me, Anna, of all the going back to testing was UT. Enormous popularity, frighteningly high volumes. And they go back to mandatory testing. The way they even look at applications is different from many colleges in the United States. It's more like a European college. As they say here, our experience during the test optional period reinforced that standardized testing is a valuable tool for deciding who's admitted and making sure those students are placed in majors that are the best fit. So should you parents or students be interested in UT Austin, they look the way European colleges do at what experiences their applicants have had in the majors they want to pursue. Not always the way a US college does things. And then you had other big name schools making headlines because they said, I'm sorry, we're going to stay test optional. We know what we want. That included Michigan, Columbia, Vandy, Cornell, right? And what happens is mixed messages and media hype, right? And there's Columbia talking about its purposeful and nuanced application review. Columbia won't even publish, Anna, its admission rates anymore. We know they're somewhere between 4 to 6%. So thanks, Columbia, purposeful and nuanced. They have their priorities too. So Anna, standardized testing, tell us what's going on.
So when you were talking about the announcement from UT Austin, to go into more detail about their reasoning, they found in their research that students who did not submit scores were almost a full grade point lower in their GPA than students who did. And a lot of the students are just seeing this, that the kids are not ready for the rigor that they're seeing at the universities. And besides that, some schools quoted having missed some applicants who are from disadvantaged backgrounds because of the inflated scores that everybody else is submitting. You know, those folks didn't submit theirs, and even though it could have helped their application, because it was below the median score, they withheld it, and that actually hurt their candidacy. So with all that, there was definitely a decline, but the majority of the students that I've encountered, of course, in my profession and their families, they know that test optional is not really optional for the majority of the schools that they want to submit to. That applicants, anecdotally and with the data that we have, applicants who submit their scores have a much greater chance of gaining acceptance. Not to say that there isn't a school for a student who is going test optional. We've had a lot of students, Nina and I between us, who did apply test optional and are happy in their programs. But College Board reports that in this past year, 1.9 million students took the SAT. So that's an uptick from 1.7 in the prior year, and in 2021, it was 1.5 million students. So I believe the largest testing pool they had was 2018. And then after COVID, we all know. But the unfortunate thing is, besides the number of testers declining, the scores are also declining. So we are in this strange year in which people who are testing, and these are the people who were learning their core math subjects through COVID, through Zoom, through whatever the available means were back then. And we're seeing huge gaps in knowledge, and it's kind of catching up to them. So despite the rampant grade inflation, which is unfortunately the case for just about every school we encounter, we've never seen more straight A students, right? But unfortunately, these standardized tests are not showing that. And these tests are kind of like the canary in the mine, right? They're signaling that there's something going on with the education system, and those years were really, really detrimental, and that needs to be remedied. But a lot of people just don't want to hear it. And so those folks who say, well, standardized tests are not fair and we shouldn't have them, they're kind of shooting the messenger and ignoring the message. So besides the SAT, the ACT is alive and well. They reported 1.4 million testers in the graduating class of 2023, and that's up a bit from the previous year. However, similar decline in the composite scores. Of course, as we mentioned, people are choosing where to submit their scores. So the mixed messages that Nina was talking about, the advice is usually do prepare to test, but then what you do with that score will probably vary depending on what your target schools are. So this is just a little bit of the trend in the ACT scores that I wanted to show you, and the trend in the SAT scores. So down from 1068 to 2023. I'm not putting these graphics here so much to scare you as much as to give heart to the people who call me and say, my child scored in the 900s on the PSAT last year, and kind of in a panic. You're in good company. Just about everyone who tested with no preparation and no forewarning, which the schools gave none this year, kind of ended up in the same range. But again, I think with due effort, everything is remediable. So a lot of folks are kind of unaware that they have choices. So some people, especially from the New York area, right? Like, back in my day, I took the SAT, and so my kids are taking the SAT. So there we are. But there's another test to choose from. The ACT has been around for ages. It was historically popular in the Midwest.
Probably soon.
But it has been very, very popular among our students as well. So the major differences between those tests are speed. The ACT, while has some trade-offs, easier verbal function. It is a little bit more stringent with the time constraints. So the new SAT, we keep calling it the new SAT, we should just call it the SAT. This is what it is now, is a computer adaptive test. The ACT is available as a digital test, but it's still a linear test. So I'll talk a little bit about what that means. So on the SAT, we have 2 verbal modules, 2 math modules. They differ in difficulty, but in content, they're about the same. On the ACT, we also have the added task of a science section. And a lot of people are not terribly interested in taking the science section. So I always tell them that it's a science reading section. So lots of charts and graphs, nothing that you cannot manage. Both tests do offer a writing section. The SAT would only offer that in a school day test. It's no longer part of the national test dates, but some students who take it during their school day testing might encounter it. So this is a little graphic about the differences. Again, just comes down to speed, comes down to the mode that the tests are administered in. The SAT certainly has become more attractive with that slightly shorter time frame, right? Only 2.5 hours versus a little bit over 3 hours for the ACT. So a lot of students were excited about that. But as far as, which test to choose, it's kind of like Coke and Pepsi. It's a matter of personal preference. I think both tests are a little bit awful in their own right. So it really is something that you have to think through with your student and think about what is going to be an easier tackle for them. Usually when students test, it's rare that they would test in a much higher percentile on one than the other. So if it's a matter of preparation, you will succeed in either. It is a matter of putting in the time and effort though. So a little bit more about the key differences. On the SAT, we have these very short passages, but they are complex. And compared to the ACT, I would say that's about 7 notches higher in difficulty. We do have a little bit more time to manage there. And the grammar questions on the SAT are much fewer compared to the grammar questions on the ACT. There's a whole separate section with 45 minutes of pure grammar joy. So the grammar and reading are tested in the same module on the SAT. On the SAT, there is one question per passage, which, is very different from what we've seen before. In the ACT, if you're invested in analyzing a passage, you might get a few more points out of it, more questions there. So just a little difference there. The math section on the SAT is shorter, and it definitely addresses fewer topics than the ACT does. But you really have to know those topics in depth, because some questions are going to disguise very simple things and make them look a lot more complicated. So you have to be able to recognize that, oh, it's still the same content, but it just looks a little scarier than the simpler version. The SAT is much more algebra heavy. On the ACT, you'll have about 3 times as much geometry. Which I think is a wonderful thing, because those points are easy to train for. And I don't know if you can tell how excited I am by the largest bullet point on the page. Desmos is available on the SAT throughout the math section. On the ACT, when students are taking the test in the digital format, they are allowed the use of Desmos and their own calculator, but on the paper version on the ACT, just the calculator alone. So Desmos is a fantastic tool. Yes.
Can you point out what Desmos means?
Sure. So Desmos is an online calculator. It's a graphing calculator. It's if you ask me, it's the best thing since sliced bread. And I just had a wonderful workshop the other day with my colleagues about all the wondrous things that you can do on Desmos that I think most people don't even suspect. But having said that, unfortunately, if you don't have like the math base, just having this amazing tool is not going to take a student very far. So we still have to know things, but it's a fabulous thing to have on the test. So the way the SAT is scored is different from the ACT. The total score is up to 1,600, and each section can give us up to 800 points. The new digital test report is kind of abysmal. You can't really glean much information from it. On the ACT, the composite score is up to 36. You have 4 scores from the English, math, reading, and science section, and then those get averaged out. And on the ACT, we still have the benefit of seeing the actual test questions. About twice a year, they allow us to purchase the test that the students took. Now, on the SAT, we're never going to see those questions once the test is done. Kind of like on the GRE, GMAT, those exams have never released any of those. So different for the SAT. So their score reports, which I'm very much looking forward to examining on Friday, are scanned in that they will not tell you how many questions you got wrong and where you got them wrong. Because of the adaptive nature of the test, they just do not release that information. But I do like that on the report for the SAT, because it's a digital report, students can click on a link that will bring them to the College Board question bank. And they have questions filtered especially for their level and based on the things that they struggled with on the test. So I think that's a really wonderful tool I'm not sure if it's as amazing as having a whole test in your hands, but it's still something. And so it's a good resource for kids who are going to be, learning and examining the questions for another try of the test. So what's new about the SAT is that high school students don't generally take adaptive tests. An adaptive test is shorter, which is, again, obviously very attractive to a tester. But because you have fewer opportunities and you never know which questions you're going to get, you really have to have mastery in a whole lot of realms to make sure that whatever they throw at you, you can do successfully, because your performance on the first module of the verbal section will affect what you see on the second module. So the content and the skills that they're testing are largely the same, but I think because the shorter test is less forgiving, and there's less room for missteps and less room to redeem themselves, the students may not necessarily love it as much as the linear paper or digital ACT. So I know it's new to the United States students, but this test has actually been live abroad since March of 2023. So we've been hearing a lot of good information from the people who are tested, who have tested there. And so my students had the benefit of knowing what to expect in the exam. So the PSAT this year was computer adaptive as well. As I said, unfortunately, most schools did not really prepare the students in any way. A lot of the folks were unaware that they're heading into a computer adaptive test. So there were plenty of glitches, but I think if you consider the large scale of the rollout, as much as I'm not here to to commend the College Board in any way, shape, or form, it's not as bad as it could have been. So we are eagerly awaiting the March exam results in 2 days. What I liked about the PSAT this year is that the October testers got their results in November. Back in paper time, they used to wait until December to give us the results. And I really like the PSAT as like a planning tool, because it's early enough in the year, not so much for the 10th graders who take it, but for the juniors who take it. It's a really good way of seeing, where they are and what plan they can make and where to go from there. Again, not a reason to panic if you don't like your score, not a reason to think that this is, all I'm capable of, but just, a nice indicator for the students, like, okay, this is what I have to do going forward. So the digital SAT, again, nice and short in the description, but it really is 64 minutes of verbal, kind of like the 65 minutes of the paper reading test. So we don't have a break between the two verbal modules. So it's rapid fire. You finish your first 27 questions in 32 minutes, and then off you go right into the next one. Some of the items on the questions are experimental. We never know which. The students have maybe their suspicions, but we can't confirm nor deny. And again, what you do on the first section is huge, because if you miss a certain number of questions, you are going to get an easier module versus a harder module. And so you're already pegged into a certain level score that the second module can fine tune a tiny little bit, but will not let you kind of, jump out of. So the performance in the first module is very, very important. I mean, I think all the students go in there with the intention of not getting anything wrong. So when you see a lot of people speculating about exactly the number of questions you have to get right on the first module to get into that harder module, I don't know if that's very fruitful, because it varies from test to test based on the test difficulty. Um, and again, students are there to get to get them right as much as they can, not like say, oh, I'm gonna get exactly 5 wrong. So that's something that's a little hard to gauge on an adaptive test. The math, if you notice, we have a whole lot more minutes and fewer questions. So the 2 modules consist of 22 questions. Usually about 2 items on each section are experimental, and we have a whopping 35 minutes to deal with them. But not all the questions are terribly straightforward, and especially, if you've been reading any of the remarks from the March testers, oh, that second module was, oh, terrible, awful, whatever. And I had a few students who actually remembered the questions and they sent them to me. And some students were like, oh, this is more advanced than we've ever, discussed. But that's just College Board kind of making it look scarier than it is. They are still testing your basic quadratics and polynomials. There's no fancy calculus on the test still. So they're just really good at their jobs and making the questions look horrific. But if the student has mastery and they're able to recognize what that content is and implement that set of steps that they learned to get to those answers, then I think it's very, very manageable. So as I said, each section is scored on a scale of 200 to 800 points. Right now, the national average is somewhere around 500. But that's, the schools that Nina discussed earlier in the presentation are obviously looking for something much above that. If a student tested prior to the digital administration, the score reports are compatible. So super scoring should be available for those students. But policies vary at individual schools. I don't know, Nina, if you might speak to that, if they released any information about scoring, super scoring paper with digital or not.
Oh, before 2020, the schools really were clear about what they were going to do. I remember Tulane talking about it and so on. But no, I haven't heard too many particulars about that, but we're going to watch that very carefully as we go in and when we fine tune a student's list and, we make lists that are realistic and so on, we're going to have to look at that as well. But
I'm
no, I
sure
have
they're
not heard that discussed.
Yeah, I'm sure they're not ready to discuss it just because this is so new here. Some
Exactly.
of the kids were actually part of the pilot program, and so when they took the digital test in the United States earlier this year, prior to March, and they got those results, colleges would have no way of knowing that it's a digital test because the report looks exactly the same. So I'm sure they're still kind of figuring that part out. So again, to clarify the difference between a computer exam and a computer adaptive exam, both are administered on a computer, but the computer-based exam will give all the testers the same kinds of questions in the same version of the test. On an adaptive test, there are 2 modules for the second. Everybody gets the same base module, one version or another of it. But on the second module, there's an easier and harder version. And different concepts come up with different frequencies depending on the difficulty of the module. So some of the, more gnarly grammar rules might appear on verbal section of a harder nature. Some more interesting looking math questions might appear in a harder math module. So the adaptive nature, again, is a little bit hard to gauge for the students in real time, I think. So if you are a student watching, when you're testing, please do not think about those things and just work through the test rather than worry about, oh, which version did I get? You are where you are now. So, do the best you can right where you are. So item response theory is the base for all these adaptive tests. Again, it allows us to assess who is sitting in front of the computer with fewer questions. So less time spent is always a welcome thing. I have students who get extended time because of learning differences. And sometimes it takes like a real toll because the benefit of having the extra time to work through things is sometimes outweighed by just the sheer exhaustion that they feel there. And as new as this adaptive testing is to our students, it is not new to me or to my colleagues, because this is what the GRE and GMAT has been for years. And so we have wonderful tools to help our students prepare to tackle those tasks. So from the March exam, again, I know there were stories of people who were not able to submit their tests, some unfortunate formatting issues with some students whose math section was botched because parentheses didn't show up in the right place. But my takeaway again is that it's not as bad as it could have been. And I'm sure glitches are going to come up because just the nature of technology is such. But overall, I don't think it was terrible. Again, not to put any feathers in College Board's head. They did announce a Blue Book update. Blue Book is the app that you take practice exams in and that you use for the SAT exam. But most students reported feeling a low stress environment when they were in the test. Proctors seem to be reasonably well trained. Some of them were not exactly on script, but again, within reason. So differences in content, vocabulary is back and strong. I think it's always kind of been in the background for the ACT and a little bit on the SAT, but what I'm enjoying about this test is that vocabulary is back, because I think for your college experience, you need to know words.
And would you be able to give an example for those of us who love vocab and love teaching English? Are they the vocabulary questions in context of a passage, or are they standalone vocab words?
So, as I mentioned, the texts on the SAT passages are complex. So within each text, so even though they're not overtly, it's not the good old days where we have, analogies or synonyms or whatever. We don't have those questions anyhow. There is vocab and context questions. But within each passage, I would expect to see some challenging words. And sometimes when I work with my students, we keep vocab journals, and I think that's just a nice thing to do. Starting from tomorrow, go start a vocab journal, and make sure that you jot down words that either you're familiar with but you can't define, or just brand new words, because even on the ACT, when it's not featured as prominently, it's very important, because if you can't make heads or tails of an answer choice or a question because there's a word that's kind of key to it, we are going to miss points, unfortunately, because of that. So as far as preparing for this test, I wouldn't say that the content is terribly different for the math, because they're still very much aligned with the Common Core. On the SAT, a lot of Algebra 2. As I said, on the ACT, a little bit more variety. They dip into slightly more complex topics, but even the more complex topics are not very excessively represented on the test. So you don't have to be a fabulous mathematician to do well on the test if you go the ACT route. The more transparency with the ACT scoring and more access to materials for the ACT scoring might make it a slightly different prep for the ACT than SAT. But we've had a lot of really wonderful new material from companies here and abroad, again, because it's been in the works for quite a few years. The announcement was almost 2.5 years ago. So they've been diligently preparing, and we have nice tools and resources for our students. But whatever test you choose to pursue, it's important to master the concepts that are going to be tested, but also practice in the real format of the test. So my students suffer through many practice exams, some of them at proctored locations, some of them we choose to do with self-proctoring, but whatever it is, it's absolutely essential to practice in the same mode that the test is given. So for the DSAT, I'm actually super excited. The College Board released 2 additional tests in the Blue Book. So before we had 4 exams on College Board's Blue Book app and a PSAT. And I have to say that's scant. You know, I usually have students do like a dozen exams before they test, between homework, between drills, between practice tests. So I'm excited about the 2 tests that they added. Most students take the test 2 or 3 times. There are a few students who just test once and they're happy with their results. But, you know, for a lot of kids, this is a stressful test. And it's nice not to feel the pressure of like, you know, you have to perform and you have to perform perfectly. And this is the only chance you get. I think that's a lot. So I think there are different schedules, different durations for preparation for different students. So the tests are often given almost every month. So you have a lot of choices. So maybe a student can consider their learning style. Do they enjoy putting in a lot of effort over short periods and just like give it their all and never have to think about it again? Some students really benefit from the more leisurely pace of preparing and having that as part of their academic load throughout the year. But whatever your students' work and style is, it's good to have a plan in mind because ideally, my happiest students are those who finish the testing before junior year really gears up. So I've worked with students, a lot of the time they're the younger siblings of former students and whose parents have learned the hard way, that it's nice to get these things out of the way. So if a student has the bulk of their math course curriculum down, it's nice to prep in the summer between sophomore year and junior year, and then test in the summer. There's an August SAT and an early fall test. The ACT is given in September. And, you know, if they have to retest, October tests, November tests are available. And that really clears up their schedule for the junior year workload, gives them time to do something exciting, do some volunteer work during the year. Some kids are not ready to do that right after sophomore years because different schools have different paces for their math courses. But even if a person hasn't taken their Algebra 2 exams, it might be beneficial for them to do the prep because then they're kind of taking in the algebra content prior to starting their junior year. So it serves them on the test, but it also prepares them for a successful year academically. So the key is to plan and not, you know, not just say, I think I'll take the SAT and just go for it, just to see what it's like. If you want to see where you stand, plenty of opportunities to take practice ACTs or practice SATs instead of doing the official tests and then letting that be your guide. Or you can use your PSAT scores. The majority of students that are in our area and across the states did take the PSAT this year. So they are different students at this point because most of them took it in October, right? So there's growth since October to March. But again, it could be a little bit of a guide to help us figure out what the best path would be for those kiddos.
Oh, Anna, there's just so much for our families to absorb about this. I want to mention a couple of things. Of all things, the title comes up, what you can't control. You can't control College Board and ACT.org. These are very profitable, not-for-profit institutions. And while they'll market themselves like they're doing everything for everybody's benefit, we know that they're big rivals. They're all scared about their market share. And the reason they're changing the versions particularly College Board, is they're responding because ACT had taken up so much market share, right?
You're
So
absolutely right. And I'll interject this. ACT has not been static. SAT usually goes for these like big glamorous changes. We had a huge change in 2016 when they changed the format. And the ACT has been quietly tweaking a little bit of their format. So, the science section looks a little bit different than it did a few years ago. They're tightening the bolts with the math section. Every crop of students comes up and says it's harder than the previous one every time. So there are a little bit of changes on the ACT side as well. But the ACT said that they're committed to providing paper tests. And even though in their school day testing, so some schools contract SAT and ACT companies as part of their curriculum. It's for some schools, it's a requirement for graduation. For other schools, it's just a metric that they employ. And so the majority of people who took the test did take them as part of their school day testing. And in those places, the ACT has been experimenting a little bit more, and they've really been pushing their digital test more than the paper exam. So again, this ACT kind of markets their quote unquote stability, right? But it hasn't been completely static, but obviously nothing as dramatic as what College Board has done.
absolutely. And again, you have these non-profit institutions called colleges and universities, and they're businesses too. And part of the lessons that all our families learn and students learn is these aren't personal decisions that these colleges make, they're business decisions. They're setting strategic priorities. Their boards of trustees are telling them what to do and driving things about the admissions process. So there's so much business going on behind the scenes, and it's tough for parents and students to absorb all of this. We can't expect them to, but there's a lot of that we watch, and that there's this dynamic always going on. And I have to say, in this most confusing year ever, or season ever, and so on, with all those headlines, these colleges, they'll justify their decisions about being test optional and list the reasons, diversity, whatever, whatever. Then they'll go back to testing and they'll say the same reasons, right? So we just have to be tough and strong and help our students be the best applicants they can be.
Exactly. No, you're absolutely right. And the wording that these colleges use, and you're so right about them being for-profit institutions. I know a lot of kids, just because it's been incredibly competitive, even at universities that historically were not, terribly selective, because of the large volumes, we're getting kids who were shoo-ins in our state schools who are now being declined, right? But all this talk about holistic consideration and all that, I mean, how much time was it taking them to look at that one test score that was preventing them from considering the applicant as a person as a whole before this? So yeah, you're right about the marketing talk.
It's just wild. And so part of learning the process is learning there are things you can't control, like boards of trustees decision making. What I have there in the institutional priorities in bold is huge, right? And things like, I'll just mention BU quickly. Here's a picture of BU. BU's drop in acceptance rate was so dramatic. And then 2 years later, we found out they had maxed out space and they had all these issues, and they had to cut, the acceptance rate to be able to run the school properly and have space for their students to live. So, and at least BU admissions explain that sort of thing. So parents, we can't control what these institutions are doing behind the scenes. We can't control how, all of them, they're not a united front necessarily. Each of these has its own priorities and its own way of reviewing applications. Here's Duke, for example. I just want to point out, because it's so very popular. Again, most colleges in the country aren't this selective, and students always have a happy home at the end of this process. But people like to talk about these schools, and the media loves to talk about it. Duke said, this was this year's cycle. In the early cycle, they haven't announced their regular decision results yet, that, I scrutinize, Anna, these media releases. And so if you look closely, If they took 800 students or so from early decision and 145 of them were from the Carolinas, that tells people who don't live in the Carolinas what might have happened in the process. So just so much behind the scenes nonsense goes on. And it's just part of our role is to educate you, the family. Villanova, boy, is that a popular school in this area. Oh, the flags are flying and the basketball team and everything else. But Villanova's here saying, how do you, there's just challenge, how do you distinguish between applicants? We look at other factors in the process to distinguish between candidates. But here's Villanova offering 2 rounds of early decision, a round of early action, and a round of regular decision. Okay, and what happens is it fuels the volume, the applicant pool grows, and then you get into all these nuanced decisions that happen. So, okay, what can you control? Well, there are things that you can control. Students, and they know this, you know, when they come to me, we go over a quick and dirty, and then more detailed when it's necessary, how colleges make these decisions. And it starts with being the best student they can be, nailing the academics, and is very thoughtfully explained what goes on in the testing thing. So managing the test prep process. And then when students are going to be applicants, they need to understand that this is a storytelling process on the application front. And writing essays are such an important component of many schools' applications, even in the age of AI, and we can talk about that for another hour, which we don't have, but writing essays that are authentic voice. I have my students and families sign off on this every year. Social media presence, sometimes there are things that students can do to improve, you know, their marketability as well. That's a big part of this process. And taking advantage of available opportunities. That has to do with being active in the community, causes that you care about, bringing things to life in your school that you do outside of school, or things you do in school and bringing them outside, right? So these are things students can control. Okay, long-term strategy. By this, I mean, I do this, and in every introductory meeting with a family, what are your goals for the college experience? Is it to get a brand name? Is it for prestige? Is it to learn bio engineering? Is it to be on the West Coast, right? Everybody's priorities are different, not to mention financial reasons, and have their ROI, right? What is your ROI for this college experience? And then the student's journey, which is fundamental to this process, way before they have to apply. What are their talents and interests? What do they love to do? And if we can shape it into where do you see yourself in 5 years or 10 years, right? Just learning to think that way and doing what we can do as counselors to help them along in that journey. It's such an important part.
And I have to say that your students are very fortunate to have you in their corner, because with even the best schools, you know, they have counselors who don't have the same kind of time to spend with each student. And they often advise students at a date that's much too late, you know. I know I've sent you people in their absolute beginning of their high school journey or earlier, because sometimes it's so important to kind of get a hand on the pulse and figure out what kind of student is this, where are they going to thrive, and what can you do to help them have the best high school career. What courses should they be taking? What activities could they benefit from? Um, and as far as testing goes, in terms of timelines, counselors at schools often advise to test in March of your junior year for the very first time. And for me, that's horrifying, because when you have to retest and it's May and you're doing APs, or it's June and you're doing finals, it's a little bit later in the game that we would like. So I think planning and having a long-term strategy is a key to removing the anxiety from this process. So very, very important to think about.
Absolutely. The more you know earlier, the better you are. And I think on the counseling side, yes, the school counselors are overwhelmed. I had more families than I could count who came to me in the middle of 2023 and had never heard of a digital adaptive test, did not know that their students were going to be taking that new PSAT. And then I have had students tell me, oh, no, I didn't even sit for that test. I didn't think it was important. Or I'm going to be test optional probably anyway.
Right.
But the counselor part of us, the message isn't to get into college, it's kicking back a few notches and saying, even taking a PSAT, which by the way, nobody ever sees those results but a couple of us, is
Right.
a benchmark and an understanding from a counseling perspective of, are there weaknesses in quantitative skills or qualitative skills? There's so much use for this as part of sort of the life journey and the student journey. And this is just something, it's part of that process, not to put pressure on people, but to be able to understand that the more we know about an applicant, a student, somebody on their journey through high school, the more we can help them. So I just wanted to mention that, Anna, as well, related to the testing issue. On the college side, oh my goodness, right? How do you put together a list? Hopefully it starts before the list with, what does your student want to do? What are your family's goals for college? What are your financial goals, right? Here in this bullet point, a college's approach to merit aid, right? Thank goodness there are some great resources out there, some public facing, some in the counselors network, about colleges that tuck away money and love to award merit aid. Why do they do it? Because they're businesses. They want to grab a good candidate before somebody else does. But we know the colleges that allot money toward this sort of thing. Outside of need-based aid, again, this is merit aid. Majors, that's a discussion for another day. There's so much pressure and so much I see in the media and questions I get, Anna, from families about, what do I major in? Do I change the way that my student applies because it's too competitive in the business school? Maybe they should be an economics major, all of this. There are ways to look at this in a more deliberate way, not to mention that the colleges vary in how they scrutinize candidates. Something that I'm very big into and just going to mention here, I know we've been at this a while, is there are ways, and they're for the good of your students, again, to differentiate the candidacy. And that's understanding how an applicant is reviewed, when they're reviewed, what the different components are outside of the transcript and the testing, where they could be differentiated candidates and be far more interesting, not only have a happier journey themselves, but be more interesting to colleges.
Of course.
Okay, wow. Right. So there's the PSAT as the baseline. We talked about that. We talked about considering the testing. And Anna, I think I'm on your turf here. So I'll turn that back over to you.
Well, I think it's both our turf. You mentioned merit aid, and you know that a lot of colleges base that decision on, besides grades, on test scores. So even universities that say that we are test optional, they will use those test scores for allocating that merit aid. Besides that, the test scores can help a student opt out of remedial courses. So if you've tested at a certain level, then you're not required certain introductory level courses that, well, you have to take time to go through and pay for. So they're nice things to consider. I've had students who had, full rights because of their scores or substantial scholarships. So you mentioned return on investment. That's something that's quite rewarding for a lot of students. So when you're thinking about the schools you're headed to, it's great to know what their policies are, but because we tend to cast a wider net in these crazy times, Nina. You probably want to know to test even if some of the schools on your list are currently test optional, because those policies may be changing.
Right, right. You know, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I know that this is on parents' minds, and I attended a webinar myself last night where that exact question came up. And what we were told by a senior person in admissions is anybody who's going to be changing the policy, this is the time they're going to be doing it. Because once you get closer to the end of that junior year in the summer and forget that August 1st is when all the apps go live, that they can't do the change then, right? So people who are parents of rising seniors, I think within the next month, we're going to know those major changes to testing policies. But then who knows for the following year?
Exactly. So I think, having a test score is something that's going to open more doors. Besides the admissions process, it also just, I think it's important for the kids to know that this is something that they can tackle, because frankly, it's probably not the last test that they're going to take. A lot of our students go on to graduate school, and if you've taken the SAT, then you're already halfway prepped to the GRE, or GMAT or whatever. So, we don't want the students to say, well, it's hard, I don't think I could do it, and just then have that feeling of like, oh, but I didn't, so I'm not sure I can. So there's a lot of positivity that comes with actually putting in the work and seeing your success and seeing how it translates um, to the application process, and then to the rewards that that you have with admissions, and again with the merit aid. So if you have very little time to prepare, uh, I think 6 to 8 weeks leading up to the test is reasonable. But for a lot of students, especially if you're prone to anxiety or you have a hugely overloaded schedule, not the best idea to do. Some people who thrive on pressure will really enjoy that kind of thing, but a lot of my students prefer a more leisurely pace. And of course, unless you're headed to some place like Georgetown that wants to see all your scores, you should plan to take the test several times. And a lot of the schools, again, this will vary from one place to another, will consider the best of your scores. So super scoring or score choice might be an option for you. Um, and there's no pressure to release all the exam results. So my, again, happiest students start early and finish by spring, the latest of their junior year. Not to say that I have not had students test in their senior year. You absolutely can. You will meet every deadline if you take the October exams. But it's just a little bit more stressful than it has to be, because then you're, you know, handling the applications, the essays, and everything in between. So it's just nice to have that component done and dealt with early.
Absolutely. And to sum up here, looking forward to 2024-25, the app cycle that's to come, right? Here are some things we might expect. We do our best, Anna and I do, to be in tune with this business, right? We hear a lot of things, we read a lot of things, we attend a lot of meetings. Definitely an increase in test taking for all the reasons you're hearing. Tempered growth in application volume, meaning at some point these rises, they're going to level off. They can only be so popular, and some of these popular institutions are changing their requirements, like the UT Austins and University of Georgia's and Florida Gators of the world. I see that volume not going as nuts in the future as it has the last 4 years. AI is something, I've been on a committee for college counseling on this subject. I've been listening and following what colleges are saying about this, both on the applicant side, where I have a policy in my group about the use of AI, but also listening to admissions offices who say they're using it more sort of to run their business more efficiently, like scanning transcripts and running their business, not that they're going to turn over decision-making to AI. So from what I hear and knowing the holistic business, nobody's going to be doing that to your child. And how they are looking at components of holistic review, like we've talked about, grades, test scores, extracurriculars, teacher recommendations, all of that. We're watching to see, some have announced this publicly, but very few, how that shift will happen over the next year. So that's something, I do on an individualized basis because all candidates are different and all lists are different and all students are different.
Course.
So yeah, right, bumps along the way, but somehow it never fails, Anna. It just always works out. Students wind up in the right places.
Yeah, I mean, I've had very few students hate the universities where they end up. I'll say none, actually. Um, so I think we can turn over to a few questions, Nina, if you don't mind addressing. There's a question from Rochelle Z in our chat.
Okay.
Was curious to know, what is early action?
Sure. So early decisions are in a few different categories. Early action is a non-binding commitment that says if you apply by a priority date, so not January 1st, right? But maybe November 1st, you will get a decision earlier from our college versus early decision, which is a binding legal signed agreement that you tell a college in either ED, ED1, ED2, if you take me, I agree to come to your college and withdraw all my other applications. So it's a difference between legal and priority, not legal.
Mhm. And I know you mentioned there are different levels of early decision. There's early decision 1, early decision 2. Could you speak a little bit about what might be advisable to certain applicants, whether to go for regular or for early?
Absolutely. That's something that, again, every student's different. I love the idea of using priority programs, but early decision, again, being a binding legal agreement, is a financial decision on the part of the family. It's a student decision on, I really want to go to the school, and that's it. But sometimes then in my cohort of applicants, I have students who shouldn't use priority dates. It happens with a few of them every year. And the reason might have been that they had a bumpy journey for whatever reasons, illnesses, concussions in sports, whatever it is, where it's messed with their transcript. And I know that they're going to deliver much more sound grades in the first semester of their senior year. I just went through this with a student who had some good results. So there are times when the early program, the early action or early decision one isn't right for you. And by the way, colleges do this because they're businesses and they want to fill their seats early.
We have another question from Mary Alosio. Hi, Mary. Thank you for joining.
Hi, Mary.
So Mary was wondering whether PSAT scores are ever submitted.
Oh,
And answer
oh
is
my.
absolutely not. So PSAT scores are not even legally allowed to show up on a transcript. PSAT scores go absolutely nowhere. Besides, if you're testing in your junior year, that makes you eligible for the National Merit Scholarship. But besides that, those scores are not used anywhere and they do not appear anywhere in your transcript. They're not the basis of any decision for any university, including Georgetown. Although that's the one I would suspect also.
Yeah, Georgetown loves its history of testing, but yes, PSAT, great baseline, great indicator of gaps in the student's learning. Totally confidential. Only a few of us ever know the scores.
Absolutely. And again, such a good tool for students and for parents to kind of get their remediation measures in place if they're needed. Because if the PSAT is administered in October, it is kind of toward the beginning of the year, and there's a lot of room to do whatever needs to be done to support the student and make sure that they have a successful year. Mary was also wondering whether merit aid goes hand in hand with the endowment of a school. I would have no idea. So Nina, if you have any.
Oh, whoa. Well, I think the answer is we never know the answer to that question. While big name schools love articles that show what great endowment they have, right? Merit aid, what I found is there is just certain institutions that are either they're a little more aggressive marketers, whatever their endowment is, they're trying to make smart decisions and lure in students. And that's why they have merit aid programs the way that they have them. So, in fact, if you look at the top 10 endowments in the United States, most of them are in these elite, highly selective universities that don't believe in merit aid at all. Harvard and all its peers, for example, they will honor 100% of demonstrated financial need, and they have zero merit aid and zero scholarships for athletes. So there you go.
Wonderful. We have another question from Katya. What are your recommendations in light of college applications for internship, community service, other activities for summer between 9th and 10th grade? What a great
Oh
question.
my goodness. Wow. Well, that question is quite popular and tough because students are still, they're so very young then that some of their options, even working at an ice cream shop or whatever it is, or they're not going to be in the running for local jobs. I love it, Anna, when my students work, and especially in tough jobs that give them life skills, not to mention what they can show off when they write their essays, right? But seriously, you can't expect a younger high school student to get some incredible internship, right? Unless it's fostered somehow by a parent or connections. So what I love to tell my students is, if you like to write about things that are meaningful for you, like do or create your own activities. If you play volleyball, give volleyball lessons, right? If you love soccer, teach kids who are less fortunate than you are how to play soccer, right? Teach kids math or science who need help in math or science. So I think those that are initiated by the student are really the most effective for a younger student.
And I have to say that, selecting activities just because they may appear, wonderful on paper is never great. Just whatever your students' interests are, if you're thinking about community service, how does the student want to contribute to the community? What interests them? Maybe it's a class that they take, maybe it's working in camp, like Nina said, having a job at an early age shows a lot of responsibility. And I think that's more important than just like going to a pay-to-play program at a fancy
Oh
university.
my goodness,
Um,
Anna, I feel so strongly about that. And some of
mhm.
my families know we discuss that item regularly in meetings and calls. And no, a college can also, like, they can kind of see through what's genuine and what's not genuine. And I know when I used to do admissions interviews, right, as an alumni interviewer, you could tell in a second the authenticity of it, right? There's a reason that the Common App limits the amount of activities that the student gets to show off. And it's so that the really important things, they
Yeah.
really
The
promise.
play
They can really
college programs are total BS.
Yeah.
So I'll address another
Very good.
question. The question was, when a student takes a test,
How
uh,
long is it?
No,
are you competing
a lot
in
of it
the
for
test
beginners
with
though.
the other students taking the test? I would just love to ask whoever's on the meeting to mute themselves, please. So yes, the tests are curved, but those curves are set prior to the administration of the test. So the curve depends on the difficulty of the question set in that particular test, not who's sitting next to you. Are there more seniors in this class taking the test, or are there more, not at all. So when my students took the test in March, and I got all the frantic messaging about how hard the sections were, and although we knew to expect it, I always say that this is good news. So the harder section in the second module is welcome news, because number one, if you're in a harder module, congratulations, you're in the higher bracket score-wise, right? And there's not too much you can do to drop, right? But it also means that the test curve is going to be more forgiving. So if you take a test and all the questions are easier, then every mistake is going to cost you more dearly. So one of the reasons that we take the SAT several times is that historically, with the paper tests for years, you could have a difference of a whopping 70 points with the same number of questions that you got right from one test to another, just because of that curve. So again, the curve is set by the test makers prior to administering the test. This is why we have the experimental items on the exam. They're experimenting on you, the students. You are their free guinea pigs. And so depending on how students perform on a test, it will be later designated as a harder item or an easier item. And it will appear on future tests. And that's how they determine the difficulty, and that's how the curve is set. So if anyone has any other questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. Otherwise, Nina and I will thank you for joining us this evening. And you are welcome to email Nina or myself with any further questions. Our information is right here. If you would like to receive the recording of this meeting, we will gladly send it to you. And I hope that our information today was helpful. And if you'd like to get in touch again, please by all means do.
Yes,
Thank
thank you,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great evening.
You
Thanks
too.
so much, and
Good to
please
see
keep
you,
in
Ann.
touch.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.